The question my party is asking now is whether I am best placed to lead us into the next general election. I have heard the answer of my parliamentary party to that question, and I accept that answer with good grace. Every decision I've taken has been about putting the country I love first. That is why I will resign as leader of the Labour Party.
So Kier Starmer is gone. So it is the 22nd of June 2026, and the UK Prime Minister has officially resigned as a result of Andy Burnham winning the Makerfield by-election, and who is expected to challenge the former UK Prime Minister, so this was Kier Starmer, to the leadership position within the Labour Party. So in anticipation of that, and the fact that Andy Burnham has won that by-election in Makerfield, it seems as though after a weekend in the Chequers, which is the Prime Minister's residence really, and when they're away from London, he's contemplated his future and come to the conclusion that it's now time for him, for the benefit of the country and his party, to move on. And to be honest, this was a question of when rather than if, following the recent local elections in the UK, where the Labour Party basically took a massive battering, which again was also anticipated, just basically following the increasing unpopularity of Sir Kier Starmer and the Labour Party. So Kier Starmer has presided over a period of time where allegedly UK workers have seen the highest rate of income tax increases, despite the fact that the Labour Party had promised not to increase those income taxes. There was also the association with Lord Mandelson and Epstein. He's also introduced a number of legislation that encroaches on citizens' privacy, such as the Online Safety Act, and now the Australian type ban on social media as well for those that are under 16, essentially, which, although the sentiment might be understood in terms of that safety, the issue for many people, including myself, is the application of this legislation, which has meant essentially more and more data needs to be collected by private corporations, many of whom are not actually native to the UK. So many of them will be US companies who may be under different jurisdictions and subject to different laws. If international governments such as the US want that data, or if even the UK government wants that data, they may be able to put pressure on those companies to provide that data, essentially. So it's been a rough time for Sir Kier Starmer. As I said, it was widely expected after the results of the local election, which basically meant that Plaid Cymru and the Scottish National Party were able to consolidate power in their regions for the first time, which had never really happened previously under a Labour government, meant that basically Sir Kier Starmer's position was untenable, because what we would now expect in the next local election, in the next general election, is that without the support of Scotland and without the support of Wales, and the erosion of the support that they would have had through gains by the Green Party, for example, it is unlikely that we'd anticipate a Labour win in the next general election, which is why Sir Kier Starmer has probably come to the conclusion that he should now move on. So I guess the question now is who will be taking his place? So obviously the reason, or the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, was the win by Andy Burnham. So he would be considered favourite now as the new leader for the Labour Party. So there was pressure following the local election results for Sir Kier Starmer to leave. And this was as a result primarily of the resignation of Wes Streeting, who was the Health Secretary. However, it is this win by Andy Burnham that was expected to put the highest amount of pressure on Sir Kier Starmer and result in him resigning, which he has now done pretty swiftly, actually. It wasn't that long ago. at the time of recording that Andy Burnham won the election. The by-election in Makerfield. Now, Andy Burnham is viewed as somebody who is left-leaning, relatively speaking. He is somebody that is trusted. He's very popular in the north of England, which often many people in that region feel as though government is more London-centric. So he is more trusted, I suppose, would be one way of putting it. He's been the mayor of Manchester for quite some time, and he has very high political stock. So he is expected to be able to galvanise the Labour Party and introduce left-leaning policies which favour the ordinary working people. Now, whether he will do this is a different question, which I'll talk about a bit later. But at this moment in time, he is the front runner. He would be the bookies' favourite, and he would be expected to become the next leader of the Labour Party. Now, in a similar vein, we would have to also consider Angela Rayner as well. So Angela Rayner was the previous Deputy Prime Minister to Sir Kier Starmer, but she is considered different enough to Kier Starmer in terms of her policies and her positions. She is somebody that famously or infamously was against the idea of private education, which would obviously be viewed as a socialist left-leaning position. And also she has always talked about her working class background and her struggles as a single mother without an education, and then coming through, despite all of that, to a very prominent and highly successful political career as the Deputy Prime Minister of the UK. So again, she would be somebody that would be different enough to Sir Kier Starmer, somebody that would be viewed, I suspect, in a similar way as Andy Burnham, and somebody that could throw their hat in as somebody who wants to become essentially, I believe, the first female leader of the Labour Party. Another individual that would also have to be considered is Wes Streeting. So Wes Streeting was one of the first most prominent UK frontbench politicians to resign. There were some further resignations, I believe, from the Defence Secretary as well. I'll double check that and fact check that for this video. But there were some other high profile resignations. But the main one that sort of undermined Sir Kier Starmer's position quite heavily was Wes Streeting, and he wrote a very scathing resignation letter, basically outlining why he just had lost complete confidence in the direction of the Labour Party and Sir Kier Starmer. Now, Wes Streeting, despite the fact he's talked about a wealth tax of sorts, would be considered more right-leaning relative to Andy Burnham, for example, and more in the mould, actually, I would say, of Sir Kier Starmer in terms of some of the policy directions he was likely to favour. So although he is somebody who believes in the NHS, he has openly, addressed the idea that he would consider part privatisation of the NHS, and we probably would see more contracts being awarded to private companies with respect to the NHS. So he's not somebody I would view as totally left-leaning. I think in terms of the wealth tax he talked about, that is a wealth tax that basically would only impact workers because it was in relation to capital gains tax rather than a tax on wealth. And I think also he is somebody that would look to work more closely with the private sector to solve some of the issues the UK is having, because that aligns with his own philosophy, which is more of the mold, I would say, of a free market, capitalistic type philosophy, essentially. So there will be some other outside bets that we would want to consider. So one would be Ed Miliband, who has actually ruled himself out, but he is somebody of the Labour old guard who may be considered a safe pair of hands, who will have a high level of political stock within the Labour Party. And it is the Labour Party that will decide the new leader of the party rather than the general public. So that is why Ed Miliband might be considered an outside bet, because he would be seen as a political heavyweight that could take on the likes of Nigel Farage, Kemi Badenoch, and Zach Polanski. Another outsider, I would say, is the legal secretary, I believe, and the current deputy prime minister, which would be David Lammy. Now, David Lammy, again, is somebody who has been in politics for quite some time, and again, also has high political stock. However, he has always supported publicly anyway Sir Kier Starmer, and that may rule him out as an alternative if, as I say, he's always been loyal to the Kier Starmer regime. Now, the reason I would mention the likes of David Lammy and Ed Miliband is that although I don't think they would, have a good chance of becoming the Labour leader relative to the other people I've mentioned, because they are significant and high profile and relatively powerful, I would say, Labour Party members, it is likely that whoever becomes leader of the Labour Party, they're going to have to work and build bridges, I suspect, with some of the other people I've mentioned, even if those people do not become, the next Labour Prime Minister, or even continue in their current roles, as Health Secretary or Chancellor in the case of Rachel Reeves, or the Legal Secretary, if that's the right name for his current position, for David Lammy. So, the million-dollar question, will Andy Burnham consider or introduce a wealth tax? And this is something based on the last video I covered, covering Gary Stevenson's position, who's been one of the main and most prominent UK economists advocating for a wealth tax. And his own view is that, he sees Andy Burnham as the best chance. And that would make sense with respect that Andy Burnham has been perceived and sort of positions himself, relatively speaking, as a left-leaning politician, and a wealth tax would be considered a left-leaning position. Now, my own view and my own expectation is that I wouldn't expect him to talk or raise the idea of a wealth tax very, very quickly, if at all. I think he will want to steady the ship. I think he'll want to lean into a more nationalistic agenda. And the reason I say that is because he has quite quickly ruled out the idea of rejoining the EU, despite the fact that previously he would have wanted to remain in the EU. So I don't think he will do anything that will rock the boat. I think his focus will be more on trying to unify the country. And I think the way he will look to do that is look at more patriotic policies such as border control, such as immigration, and making his position clear around those themes, because these are things that he will probably see as things that can quite easily galvanize the UK electorate, whether they be in the north or whether they be in the south. Whilst the idea of a wealth tax can be quite polarizing, even within the Labour or the left-leaning demographic or the left-leaning electorate, I would say. So, as I say, I wouldn't be personally hopeful that a wealth tax will be something that Andy Burnham gets behind, unless other parties such as the Green Party start gaining traction on that particular mandate. And I think the Labour Party is a Labour Party that is not an innovative party. It considers itself relatively central. So I think it will tend to follow other more extreme parties on some of these ideas. So as I say, they've tended to follow the Conservatives and Reform with respect to their position on immigration and that side of things, I would say. Whilst on tax, if the Green Party gain more traction, that is when I think they will jump on that particular bandwagon and make their position relatively clear as to whether or not a wealth tax is something they will get behind. So, interesting times. As I say, this is breaking news as we speak. Not entirely surprising that Kier Starmer is going, and one can only hope now that we will see things that improve for the benefit of the ordinary working citizen, ultimately. And that would be my hope with respect to Andy Burnham if he does become the next Labour leader, which he's widely expected to become. My hope would be that he introduces policies that will start building that pathway to a fairer economic system, a fairer tax system, and one that allows ordinary people to find an economic pathway to things like owning a house, building wealth, and also earning enough that they can build, a reasonable private pension. That means that they can then retire comfortably. So let me know your thoughts and let me know what you think about who will be the next UK Labour leader. But until next time, peace.